Good morning. I am your Professor Hsiung Ping-chen. I would like to explain to you and give a lecture about girlhood. And this is given and prepared from the perspective that marriage and sexuality, of course, is coached in demography. Namely, we had talked about birth, death, migration, and marriage. Marriage itself, of course, had the closest relation to do with gender, both for women and men, but also, in each of the phases of life for them. Namely, from birth to childhood to youth to maturity adults, and then on to aging and fertility. All right. So I'm going to use the example of girlhood in this lecture to help you understand both in terms of physiology and social cultural roles. Girls, like boys, they move through phases of life. After childhood, they become matured and they will be prepared for marriage in the conventional way. Not for everybody, but we need to understand the main frame. This is, of course, to also complement your readings. So, what about girlhood? Although we know very little until my chapter in A Gender Voyage, the woman's history really talked about the youngest phase. And the very little we know about childhood do not usually cover gender, namely to talk about differences or the sameness of girls and boys. What I would like to do is to show you how we would open up a study and write a paper. This is also meant to help you understand how you would structure your term paper. It should have a topic, an abstract, a cleared structure of different subtitles, and then, with materials that would support your argument as well as your readings and other people's works that would complement your understanding to allow you to make an argument and analysis. All right. So here's my outline. I would introduce the importance, with sometimes a preface or introduction or a story. Then I would explain how we define girlhood, whether physically or socially. And I would explain that by showing how young girls used to be brought up in traditional China, and that continues to the modern era. The daily provisions, their transformation and personal escape before I would make a conclusion. I complemented my PPT, each page, with illustrations, and I hope you would do that too. Because, after your topic abstract references, you would prepare your PPT too, and I would listen to each of your presentations, and we would have a discussion online, and then you would submit your term paper. So let me begin by showing you the intro. The intro goes like this. There is, of course, a general impression about women's status in traditional China. Your readings of Dorothy Kuo and Susan Mann had either further clarified or help you to break away and dig deeper into this conventional understanding of womanhood or girlhood. But I'm going to begin my lecture today by giving you a story to show you the background that we would cut in, namely in the late 18th century, in the Qianlong era of the Qing dynasty. So in the late 70s, 80s, our author, Mr. Wang Huizhu, witnessed a famine that struck part of the Shandong region along the Yellow River. And it's a severe famine, natural disaster, where he saw corpses lay exposed on roads. People fled from their homes and dug up graves to devour carcasses. So it's a terrible situation, that deplete wild vegetables. And he also witnessed that there were girls of 8 or 9 years old left there for people to take. And husbands, beg others to take their wives so that they would survive physically. And he also saw that people were selling their children, both girls and boys. So he saw, to his surprise, that there was a teenage girl for which the grandfather sold her for 2,000 copper cash. And yet, that is merely one half that, a ferryman had just paid for another person's wife in her 20s. During all of these happenings, there was a little 5-year-old boy standing there without anybody's bids. That is, Wang Huizhu did not see anybody wanting to buy this boy. So he was surprised, why is it that people would want to pay money for women or girls and not for boys in a supposedly patriarchal society that values boys over girls, men over women. So he was very sad, and he composed 2 poems, whereby I show here that he said that only now I realize the notion that having a boy can actually be far worse than bearing a girl, because this is the Shandong region is a place where repeated chronic famine and natural disasters occur. So he and others, us as readers, we want to pose the question, does this mean that girls were valued more as brides, concubines, maids, entertainers, or prostitutes so that people would purchase them? Could it be that in times of need, a family already having boys to carry on their ancestral line tend to, let go of the consideration of getting another boy? Namely, how will we understand, quote, the marketability of young girls versus young boys? Many of you are business majors, and you could think about that, about, when it comes to the difficult situation of the selling and buying of humankind, of people, what would these price means? The value of humans are different from the prices of women or men in difficulties. How should we approach this question of the crossroad between childhood and gender in traditional or modern China? First of all, we want to understand, with that kind of intro, how could we understand or the definition of childhood? That is, what marked the beginning or the end of a girlhood as opposed to boyhood or the general childhood? The general childhood, that we would usually think about, we want to see if it's non-sexual at certain stage. So, I would begin to show that in infancy, that is before any girl reaches the age of 7, that would be a benchmark, which is shown in both ritual and medical texts, or for boys who are younger than 8, as indicated by medical and ritual texts, that there could be a period of time from birth to 7 or 8 when gender or sexuality were last important. Just like the Book of Rites said, at 7 years of age, boys and girls shall not sit on the same mat, nor shall they dine together. Meaning that that is the point when we can begin to mark the onset of girlhood versus boyhood. So that at 6 years, they were taught the numbers, the names, and of cardinal points. At the age of 7, boys and girls did not occupy the same mat, nor eat together at 8 when going out or coming in at a gate or door and going to their mats to eat and drink. They were required to follow their elders. The teaching of yielding to others was now begin at 9. They were taught how to number the days. This is a section of the Book of Rites called 内则, internal rules. So the Book of Rites go on to say, when one is 10 years old, we call him a boy. He goes out to school. When he's 20, we would call him a youth. He's caped. When he's 30, we say he is at his maturity, he has a wife. See, you could see that marriage and sexuality comes with the progression of age. Let's first look at the definition of girls versus boys in medical texts. That is the physiology or the biophysical definition of girlhood and versus boyhood. At 7 years old, girl thus had flourishing vitality from the kidney, 肾水, 肾, with teeth changing and hair growing, while at 14, the presence of reproductive capacities, 天葵, moved through key vines and conduits that promoted timely menstruation and the capacity to bear children until age 49. So if you view this passage I read in English and the Chinese passage I show here for males, you could understand that we have what we may call an early girlhood between birth and 7, as opposed to a later girlhood that's between 7 and 8. And that would be the main period that we would focus on. Because after 14, female life course move in units of 7, and male life courses would divide by 8. And by 14 and 16 respectively, they will be prepared for marriage. If you read or listen to the performance of Bai Juyi's 长恨歌, the song of everlasting sorrow, it spoke about Yang Guifei in the 8th century, that because of her rising from humility to glory, that Bai Juyi, the poet, lamented, saying, nowadays having boys is not nearly as sensible as giving birth to a girl. So that's like what we had just talked about, the stories in the 18th century. That is, social implication and cultural rhetorics of gender and age, are closely related to class and ethnicity. We, against the general background of usually people we prefer to have boys or value men over women, but in exceptional circumstances, like with Yang Guifei or with what Wang Huizhu had witnessed in famine, there were occasions when we view the different treatments in gender, according to their age, phases of life, and circumstances, there could be times when actually people would value women. The general situation is that boys were preferred. I want to share with you another aspect about girlhood. That is, by the post-Song period China, certainly by the 16th century or Ming Dynasty, there were many families and men, fathers, brothers, who value their young girls. I have many evidences, but I want to show you a few. You may have read or heard about Gui Youguang, the very famous prose writer, essayist in the Ming Dynasty. In addition to his famous essay, remembering his mother, he also left behind 2 essays mourning for his 2 girls who died very young. One is this mourning for his daughter Ru Lan, whereby he mourned vividly and painfully for his daughter Ru Lan, who was born around 1531 and died in 1535. It was very passionate, it was very warm, it was very sad, showing that he really cared about his girls, not just his boy. He had a boy who also passed away, unfortunately, in his teens. Those times, with these evidence, you could see that child mortality was a real problem. But he also left another memorial piece for his even younger daughter, Er. Er did not even have a formal name like Ru Lan had. So he said that Ru Lan was born in the first month of 1838 and passed away the next spring, less than 1 year old. So later pure Chinese parents, some treated their girls and women increasingly with affection. And they also want to train their young girls. Because girls tend to stay emotionally closer to the parents, they were around the house more to help, and they were more likely, therefore, to take up the household chores. For this, the parents felt obliged. Parents loved them, indulged their daughters in early childhood as a private compensation because they realized that as girls grew up, they would leave their parental home, their family, natal family, and be married into another house. This compensation for young girls, could serve as a very tricky and curious balance in the patriarchal society when more challenging and difficult womanhood lay ahead for girls. We can think of many other examples, but let me give you a couple more. Yuan Mei, you may have heard, also a Qing poet. When his younger sister passed away, he mourned her, and because as an elder brother, he supported her divorce. She was sent away by her husband, but he, the elder brother, Yuan Mei, was very appreciative and grateful and supported his sister's life and valued her in the memorial essay that he wrote for her. Qiu Jin may be another person or a personality, a character that people may have heard something about. This by then is late Qing period, who sacrificed her life before the Republican Revolution, before the revolution succeeded it. So she was a married woman in Zhejiang, nowadays Zhejiang, and she was married. Here in the PPT, I show 3 pictures of her. in a Chinese costume, in a cross-dressing Western outfit in Shanghai, and also in a Japanese outfit. She lived from 1875 to 1907, and her husband allowed her to pursue her interest after she's married and born two young children. So with these evidences, those stories, they were anecdotal, but they press us to think further about the possibility that boys in traditional China or modern China, they may be valued, but do they really have a better life? Because they might not be sheltered and nurtured as well as girls or women, exactly because of the lesser positions that women had throughout their life course, especially in the early period of a woman's life, namely in the girlhood. That as the social process of maturing, many dramatic things could happen to women. When parents, for instance, says that additional attention should be given to their boys, they value them, but they got punished more and bear more pressure than girls because they were more valued. On the other hand, we should say that by late imperial China, women, a section of women, not necessarily wealthiest, but culturally better educated, they would also educate their daughters too. So daughter loving could be indulgence, but it could happen in a society, Chinese society, that presumably, had a practice of some preference. Chen Hongmo is a Qing dynasty intellectual. In his collected instructions for girls, 教女一边, he said that parents do love their girls deeply. But he advised the parents, saying that they should not be only indulging them, giving them daily comforts, fine clothing and plentiful food. Rather, as the girls grew older, Chen said, all parents, in addition to train them in needlework and embroidery, but also providing them with fine dowry, they should really teach them. They would have them educated. So that will be the most important wealth. If we were to compare 女小儿语 words for little girls and 小儿语, there is a document by the same author called Words for Little Children, including both men and both boys and girls. You could see that moral dictums in the Words for Little Girls would foster such virtues of softness and tenderness, as opposed to vulgarity and frivolousness, prudence and kindness, not meanness and cruelty, contentment as opposed to calculation, agility as opposed to skulkishness, feminine are advised. And you could read these 小儿语, words for little children, when Li Dezheng said, for all children, and therefore including boys, 一切言动都要安详，时差久错只为慌张，沉静立身从容说话，不要轻薄惹人笑骂，先学耐烦，快修死气，性躁心出，一生不忌. You could understand this, but you could see that there are some overlapping areas in their instruction literature, that differences are kept to a minimum except when training girls to prepare for betrothal, meaning marriage. Girls were reminded especially to value qiao, skillfulness, a virtue needed for a maturing woman to perform 复工 women's work once she's married. Girls were especially warned against the ills of slowness in hand, 手慢, or coarseness in heart, 粗心. Girls were taught also in the specifics of the approach and means to being woman 妇, and 妻, a wife, or a concubine, and a mother, 妾或者母. Boys were not done so. Instruction literature for girls and women therefore stress tactfulness, prudence, soft speech, respectful activity because of age, and trickle down to the younger age group. Instruction literature for boys and men, on the other hand, hardly offers any explicit encouragement for powerful, domineering, or dependable leadership character. You could read other documents such as 同盟训 about the differences of men. So this advice literature composed for children was used in education for boys and girls. If young boys are to be trained, hypothetically, we could say, using the materials like Words for Little Girls, we could say that scarcely anything could have turned out to be inappropriate. So there were overlapping areas. Actually at that time, boys were trained to be servile, passive, and reclusive too, because those were supposedly to be positive characteristics. The gender line here appeared to be blurred. Model boys embraced answers of an adorable girl. Like Gui Youguang, people's comment of him saying that he, conduct himself almost like a girl. That's meant to compliment. We have other compliments to other people like Zheng Guofan and things. Asexual games such as hide and seek existed. Mixed plays, storytelling, theater attendance include both girls and boys, old and young. Girls are permitted to play together with boys, especially at the early age. They move as girls become older. They may be playing with dolls, puppets, or animals made of cloth and clay, while boys would play shuttlecocks, 毽子, climbing trees and swimming. But the upper class boys and girls actually, in terms of physical activities, they tend to be quiet and inactive.